So here we are again. In the last lecture, we came so far that we can display the list of current values in a new fragment. But if you look at it, it's not looking very nice because we just put the list of values into a text view. And today we're going to change that by implementing a so-called RecyclerView. Now, as I wrote, the first step in making such a RecyclerView is generating an XML file where we design how a single item should look like. So let's start that. But before we start changing our code, we of course make a new branch and do our changes locally in that branch. And if everything works, we merge it into the master branch. So we go to Git, new branch, and let's call that RecyclerView for the history. And now we go to Layout, right-click on it and generate a new layout resource file. And let's call that history underscore item. And yes, we want to add that to Git. And for the moment, we do it just pretty boring. We just get a text view into it where we will display each value. So let's anchor that text view in our constraint view and then change the constraint view so that the width is the full screen, but the height is wrap content, because we want to have multiple of these entries underneath each other in our screen. Now let's go back to our text view, give it a real ID, like RecyclerView item history. The refactoring, and we might change the size of that text here. And that's in the, wait, I scroll up so you can see it. In the text appearance here. I think that looks reasonable. So now we designed how a single item should look like. The next step is that we have to generate an adapter which adapts a single item into the recycler view. And that is a new Kotlin file. So let's generate that one. And I would suggest to make that under the UI, though the order of these files is not very nice yet, but we leave it is in the moment. So let's generate a new Kotlin class file, and let's call that history adapter. Yes, let's add that. So this is a typical class, and that class can take a parameter, a property. And the property is the list of items we want to display. So it's a val items, you can call it whatever you want to, of a type list. And in our case, that list is just a single integer. And I just see that I misspelled the adapter here, but that's nice because then I can show you how to rename a file. Right click on that file, go to refactor. That is important because you might use that class in different other files. And so the IDE checks where you use it and will rename it also in the other files. So let's rename that one to adapter. So the file is renamed, the class is renamed, and every occurrence is renamed. Nice. That's why refactoring is better than just renaming. Okay, focus. Back to our history adapter. Now we have to tell Kotlin this is an adapter for a RecyclerView. And we do that by inheriting from the parent class RecyclerView dot adapter. And now we've seen already, wait, there is something. The RecyclerView adapter extends RecyclerView holder and takes this as an additional parameter. So let's add that. And this is type definition. So we put it in these brackets. And this is the new class we have to implement. And we will implement that within the history adapter class. So within the history adapter class, we will build a new class, and let's call that history item view holder. And of course, we get an error message because we didn't implement that yet. But we also have another error message over here because we have to implement additional functions. And let's start over here because that's easy. We click on implement members, and these are the 3 functions we have to implement. So let's select all of them and say, okay. And you see these classes these functions use the class we haven't generated yet. So we have to now define a class within the history adapter, which is the history item view holder class. Now the error is gone away here. So now if we go over to the documentation I wrote for you, you see that this class history view holder takes as a parameter the item binding and is in itself a child class of the RecyclerView view holder class. So we can just copy that over. You know, we still have a problem because we have to import the binding. Okay, and there is still an error, and that's just changed to constructor notification. Let's do this thing. That just means we have to put the brackets in here. And that's it. That's the skeleton for a RecyclerView. And that's always the same. So once you've done that, you can copy paste that for each of your new variants of RecyclerViews you're going to have. So now we have to implement these 3 functions. Now the onCreateView holder is in a way the same as the onCreateView we did on the fragments. So there is where we inflate the bindings. And this is just standard code, always the same. So we copied that just over from the documentation. Import a few things. And now we named this class differently, so we have to adapt that too. And here we go. First function done. Now, as second function, let's take the last one. This is just returning the number of items of the complete list you gave as a parameter to that class. And we know how to get this number of elements. We take the items list and its size. And that value we just can return. Now the interesting thing happens in this function here. This is where we use the view bindings we generated to connect the UI with the values of the item list. So we have the holder, which is the parameter function, which represents one element of our RecyclerView, which we designed in our XML file. And there we had a text view, which we called, it's the item binding, and there we have a text view, which we called item history. And the text of that element should be the current element of our items list. So it's the items list. And now we need a defined element of that list, and which one is in that position element here. So we can just pick out the element in position of the list items. Now we defined that our items list is of type integer. And as always, if you want to make it into a text, we convert it to string. That's the second step. Now we have to go to a history fragment. And instead of the text here, we want to have a recycler view. So the first thing is we have to add that to our design, or XML file. So let's go to the fragment history.xml. And add a recycler view. For the moment, just to see that we get the right values, let's leave that text view here. And let's give that recycler view an ID. And we still get an error message, missing constraints. So let's add these constraints. Left side, right side, bottom, and here we go. So let's get back to a history fragment. And now we don't only want to give the number list to the text view, we also want to give that to the recycler view. And we first have to generate a new adapter, an instance of the class history adapter. And that takes as a parameter the list of items we want to show. And that just is this variable here. And now we can go to our bindings, to the recycler view, and set that newly generated adapter variable as the adapter property. And the last step is just to tell Kotlin how it should display the recycler view. And that is done using a layout manager. And for the moment, we can just take a linear layout manager. And that linear layout manager takes the context as an additional parameter. And we get that with the function require context. Now everything looks fixed now. Let's try whether that works. Okay, so let's switch over to our app. Let's generate some values. And let's have a look at the history fragment. And here we go. So we have the text element still here, but we also have the recycler view over here. And that still looks a bit ugly, but we're going to change that in a moment. Let's go back to our design. And that's because we still have that ugly text view around, which we can delete now. And now we can add as the constraint that it should fit to the top, and the width should match the constraint. And the height also. Now let's restart it. Okay, we get the error message that we still use a text view which is no longer there. So let's delete that line here and go for it. Yes. Generate a few values. Go to the history. You can see we get all the values, and at the moment we just don't have enough values. We can add some more. Show history. And you can see we now can scroll through that values. And that is the use of a recycler view. Now, admittedly, it works, but doesn't look very nice. So let's add some more sugar to it. Let's go to the history item. We now just have to change the layout of a single history item, and the rest of the code just stays the same. That is the nice thing about separating code UI from each other. So, as a first thing, let's change the constraint layer. If you click with the right mouse button, you can convert that view to, in our case, so-called Cardview. And apply this. Not very much happening yet. So let's change some additional of the properties of that Cardview. And the first thing I want to change is the so-called layout margin. Here it is. Let's change that to 10 and the unit is dp. And now we can scroll. So we already have one single card. Now we can change some additional features of that card. So the content is still very much at the end. So give some more space to that content. Let's say 5 dp. Now there is a little bit more space between the border of the card and the border of a text view. What I like is to change the card elevation to, let's say, something like 10 dp. And now it looks nicer. You can see there's a little shadow around that card. And we might also make these corners a little bit more round. Let's say we go for 5 dp here. And that's it. So now let's see how that looks in our app. Okay. Let's generate lots of values and show the history. And I would say that already looks pretty nice. We can scroll through. We have each element as a single card. We can go back. We can add some more. They will be added at the end. So we finished adding our RecyclerView. So what do we do next? We commit it. Okay. Now we can check out our master. And merge the RecView history branch in which we just worked, merge it into the master branch. And here we go. Here's our history adapter. And I would say with that, we're done implementing the RecyclerView. And that's all I wanted to show you today. So I'm going to stop here and just tell you, have fun and happy coding.